September 14, 1954. Moundsville, West Virginia. According to the official intake records of the West Virginia State Penitentiary, an inmate named Sarah Miller was admitted to the facility's infirmary to give birth. Following standard procedure for incarcerated mothers at the time, the child was to be processed and transferred to state custody within 48 hours. However, the discharge papers for the infant do not exist. Internal logs from the following 6 months do not show a transfer to an orphanage, a foster home, or a relative. Instead, the records show a series of requisitions, signed by the prison's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Eris Thorne. The requisitions were for infant formula, pediatric sedatives, and industrial-grade soundproofing materials. Witness statements from correctional officers, filed decades later, describe a specific wing of the basement area, 4C, that was removed from all official blueprints by October of that same year. The question is not what happened to the child, but why the state of West Virginia continued to fund a nursery that, according to public record, did not have any children in it. The following investigation is based on declassified institutional logs, payroll records, and the 1992 deposition of a former night shift guard. We examine cases where the systems built to protect the public are used to facilitate the inexplicable. If you find value in the objective analysis of documented anomalies, consider subscribing to this archive. 145 to note on Section 3, Slow World. Building to understand Area 4C, one must first understand the administrative climate of the West Virginia State Penitentiary in the mid-1950s. The facility was severely overcrowded. It operated on a system of rigid bureaucracy. Every movement, every meal, and every disciplinary action was recorded in triplicate. The prison was a machine of routines. Inmates woke at 5:30 a.m. They worked in the coal yard or the tailor shop. They ate in silence. Dr. Eris Thorne had been the medical director since 1948. His personnel file describes him as a man of extreme punctuality and emotional detachment. His colleagues noted that he showed no particular interest in surgery or general practice, but possessed an obsessive focus on developmental environmentalism, the study of how controlled surroundings affect human behavior. In July 1954, 2 months before the Miller birth, Dr. Thorne submitted a proposal to the Board of Governors. The document, titled Project 72, Baseline Behavioral Isolation, requested the use of the basement storage area for a long-term study on sensory deprivation. The board approved the budget. The records indicate that 4 additional inmates, all pregnant, were transferred from the Regional Women's Facility to Moundsville over the next 90 days. This was a violation of state law, as Moundsville was a male-only maximum security prison. Yet the transfer orders bear the official seal of the Department of Corrections. There was no protest from the staff. There was no inquiry from the state. The system simply adjusted its paperwork to accommodate the presence of the women. By December, the basement of the North Wagon Gate was sealed with a reinforced steel door. The staff referred to it simply as the nursery. According to the inventory logs, the nursery was equipped with 5 stainless steel cribs, 5 infrared lamps, and a specialized ventilation system that recycled air every 12 minutes. There were no windows. There were no clocks. The nurses hired for the wing were not local. They were brought in from out of state, housed in private quarters, and forbidden from fraternizing with the general prison population. Their payroll was processed through a private holding company, not the state treasury. On paper, the nursery was a model of clinical efficiency. In practice, the guards on the night shift began to report a specific irregularity. It wasn't a sound, but a lack of one. In a facility where stone walls carry noise for hundreds of feet, the basement wing remained perfectly unnaturally silent. By early 1955, the nursery had been operational for 4 months. To the Board of Governors, it was merely a line-item account, 402 designated for specialized pediatric observation. The irregularities began as minor logistical discrepancies. The prison's kitchen logs show that Dr. Thorne's wing requested 40 gallons of distilled water per week, but only 5 gallons of infant formula. According to standard pediatric growth charts, 5 infants would require significantly more caloric intake. When a junior clerk questioned the requisition, the request was overwritten by Dr. Thorne with a handwritten note. Nutritional requirements are being met through alternative, synthesized caloric delivery. Do not deviate from the order. Then there were the laundry reports. In a typical nursery, linens are changed daily due to biological waste. However, the laundry bags coming out of Area 4C were consistently dry and free of organic matter. The linens were returned only for dust removal every 14 days. The implication in the records is that the infants in the cribs were not moving, not eating, or not producing waste in a manner consistent with human biology. In February 1955, a correctional officer named Elias Vance filed a formal grievance. Vance's post was at the end of the corridor leading to the north wagon gate. In his report, he stated that while the basement was soundproofed, the ventilation ducts were not. He didn't report screaming. He didn't report crying. He reported a rhythmic, synchronized tapping. Every night, beginning at exactly 3 a.m. and ending at 3:14 a.m., a sound like small stones hitting metal would resonate through the vents. It was a precise mathematical cadence. 24 taps, a 4-second pause, then 24 more. Vance's grievance was dismissed. 2 days later, his shift was changed to the exterior guard towers. His personnel file notes: Officer Vance exhibits signs of auditory hallucination and fatigue. Recommended for reassignment. Midpoint shift. The transition from administrative error to intentional anomaly occurred on March 12, 1955. A state inspector, Thomas Keller, arrived for an unannounced safety audit. Keller was a man of procedure. When he reached the door of Area 4C, he was blocked by Dr. Thorne. The exchange was recorded in Keller's subsequent field report. Thorne did not argue. He did not act defensive. He simply presented Keller with a document signed by the Federal Department of Defense. The document classified Project 72 as a national security initiative regarding high-stressor environmental adaptation. Keller's report changed tone instantly. He no longer questioned the health of the infants. He questioned the output. He was allowed to look through a small observation port in the steel door. He described the room as being kept at a constant 98.6 degrees human body temperature. The 5 cribs were arranged in a perfect pentagon. Keller wrote, "The subjects do not appear to be sleeping. They are maintaining a state of absolute stasis. There is no visible chest rise or fall. However, the EEG monitors positioned above each crib show brain activity that is not consistent with infancy. The waveforms are dense, complex, and high frequency, resembling the cognitive load of a mathematician solving equations in real time. The nursery was no longer being treated as a medical ward. The logs began to refer to the infants as processors. On March 20th, the requisition for pediatric sedatives stopped. In its place, Dr. Thorne ordered high-dose stimulants and electroneural conductive gel. The system was no longer ignoring the anomaly. It was accelerating it. The 1955 payroll records show that the nurses were replaced. The new staff arrivals were listed as signal technicians. None of them had medical degrees. All of them had backgrounds in cryptography and radio telemetry. The institutional language had shifted. The infants were no longer children of inmates. They were components of a system. And on the night of March 28th, the synchronized tapping reported by Officer Vance changed. It was no longer tapping. It was a broadcast. By April 1955, the West Virginia State Penitentiary's basement had ceased to function as a prison wing. It had become a closed-circuit data hub. A surviving maintenance log from April 14th describes a complete failure of the facility's electrical grid. The outage originated in Area 4C, when the prison's head electrician, Arthur Pendergast, was sent to investigate. He found the steel door open and Dr. Thorne standing at a central console. Pendergast's subsequent testimony to the board, which was immediately struck from the public record, described a scene of absolute clinical order. There were no crying children. There were no nurses. There were only the 5 cribs. linked by a series of copper wires that ran from the infants' temples to a central processing unit manufactured by the Burroughs Corporation. Thorne did not acknowledge the power failure. He was observing a thermal printer. The infants were now 7 months old. According to Pendergast, they were physically indistinguishable from one another. Their skin was translucent, a side effect of the 24-hour infrared exposure. They did not blink. They sat upright in their cribs, their eyes fixed on specific points on the ceiling. The broadcast that had replaced the tapping was now visible. On the walls of the nursery, thousands of 9-digit sequences had been etched into the paint. The infants weren't speaking. They were scratching these numbers into the lead-based wall coating, using their fingernails. During the hours, they were not tethered to the machines. When Pendergast asked what the numbers were, Thorne replied with a single, unemotional sentence. "They are calculating the probability of structural failure." Thorne explained with the calm of a man describing weather patterns that the infants were not being taught. They were being utilized by removing all sensory input: sight, sound, touch, and human affection from birth. Thorne had prevented the development of a self, the brain's massive processing power, usually reserved for language, emotion, and facial recognition, had nowhere to go. So it turned toward the only input provided: pure, raw data. Thorne had been feeding the infants the prison's own records, architectural blueprints, inmate behavioral logs, supply chain frequencies, and even the local geological surveys of the Moundsville tectonic plate. The infants were not babies anymore. They were biological prediction engines. Thorne handed Pendergast a slip of paper. It contained a timestamp for the following morning. April 15, 10:22 a.m. Next to the time was a cell, number in the West Wing, and a name: Inmate 4492. At 10:22 a.m. the next day, Inmate 4492 suffered a fatal cerebral hemorrhage while sitting at the breakfast table. He had no history of illness. The prediction was accurate to the second. The discovery was not that the infants were psychic. The discovery was that human life, when reduced to enough data points, is entirely predictable. There is no free will. There is only a sequence of numbers that hasn't been solved yet. The climax of Project 72 was not a riot or a fire. It was a 14-page report titled The Final Conclusion of the Processor Group, dated May 1, 1955. The report, found in a misfiled cabinet in the State Archives in 2011, indicates that the 5 infants reached a collective consensus. For 6 months, they had predicted minor events, mechanical failures, inmate deaths, weather shifts. But on May 1st, all 5 infants stopped scratching numbers. They stopped the synchronized tapping. According to the technician on duty, they looked at the steel door simultaneously. Dr. Thorne entered the room to reset the EEG monitors. As he approached the first crib, the infant Sarah Miller's child spoke for the first and only time. It did not say mama or hungry. It recited Thorne's own social security number, followed by a date in 1978 and a specific latitude and longitude in the Atlantic Ocean. The other 4 infants began to recite the same data in a perfect flat unison. Thorne's reaction was not fear. According to the technician's log, Thorne simply turned off the thermal printer, walked to the main breaker, and severed the power to the life support systems in Area 4C. He did not do it out of malice. He did it because the experiment was over. The machines had reached the end of the data. They had predicted the observer, and in doing so, they had rendered the observation useless. The infants did not struggle. The records indicate that the cessation of biological function occurred within 4 minutes. The state of West Virginia officially recorded the deaths as sudden infant death syndrome, occurring simultaneously due to a ventilation malfunction. The bodies were cremated in the prison's industrial furnace. No remains were returned to the mothers. The closure of the West Virginia State Penitentiary in 1995 led to the discovery of several anomalies in the North. Wagon Gates Plumbing. Workers found the pipes in the basement were clogged not with mineral deposits, but with thousands of small, circular pieces of lead-based paint that had been meticulously scraped from the walls 40 years prior. Dr. Eris Thorne did not face a tribunal. He did not go into hiding. According to Social Security records, he moved to a coastal town in Maine and lived a life of quiet, unremarkable routine. He never practiced medicine again. He took a job as a clerk for a maritime insurance company, calculating risk assessments for cargo ships. On November 12, 1978, a small fishing vessel disappeared 200 miles off the coast of Portland. The weather was clear. There was no distress signal. The names on the manifest included Eris Thorne. The coordinates of the last known position matched the numbers recited by the infants in 1955. The state of West Virginia has never acknowledged the existence of Project 72. The women who gave birth in the infirmary in 1954 were all eventually paroled. In a 1982 interview for a local historical society, Sarah Miller was asked about her time at Moundsville. She did not mention a child. She did not mention Dr. Thorne. She only stated that during her 6 months in the infirmary, she felt a strange sense of weightlessness, as if the world around her had stopped being a place and had become a sequence. Today, Area 4C is a storage room for old mattresses and rusted bed frames. The steel door has been replaced with a wooden one. However, tour guides at the now decommissioned prison often report a recurring issue with the digital thermometers used to monitor the basement's humidity. Occasionally, the readings will skip the ambient temperature and lock onto a specific number, 98.6 degrees, and for a few seconds the air in the room becomes perfectly still. There is no evidence to suggest that the infants left anything behind. There are no ghosts in the traditional sense. There is only the data. In a world governed by cause and effect, every action is a calculation. If you know the variables, you know the end. We find comfort in the idea of the unknown. But the records of the West Virginia State Penitentiary suggest a much colder reality. The unknown does not exist. There are only things we have not yet counted. The file on Project 72 remains officially empty.